Hi everybody, I'm back. Sorry, I'm on time. I was just sending a few texts. People were asking me where to watch this, so hopefully you can find it. I will post it on my homepage as well after we do the stories. But for tonight and for every night, the ghost stories will be on the Ghost Stories with Spooky Ms. T.I. group page. So I see some of you are already here. Good, it's nice to see you all. So before I get started, I want to let you know that I have found my mask, my coronavirus mask. Actually, I got a really nice one sent to me by my friend Carrie Buns. She sent Buns and I each one. But I found this coronavirus mask, and I thought that I would share it with you. So here it is. See that? This is a mask that they wore during the Black Death. So what you do is you fill the beak with posies and herbs and things so that you can't smell the Black Death and hopefully keep it away. But there you go. What do you think? Now, I don't think this will stop the virus per se, but I'm pretty sure it will work really well to make sure people stay at least 6 feet apart away. What do you think? I think so too. So there's my new corona mask. Anyway, all right, so tonight I'm going to tell you a story that I have to admit I have never told this whole story in one sitting. I've told bits and pieces of it, but I'm going to attempt to tell you the whole thing. I know I will leave some things out, and those of you who have heard this or know this story or are participants of this story, I'm sure you will, just make comments and add to it as we go, or we can do a discussion afterwards and fill in more information. So this is the story. I suppose I should call it the story of the girl in the lake. Now, my folks have, my family has a place up in northwest Wisconsin, and it's this beautiful, lots of acres and a private lake and a big house with 4 bedrooms and kitchen, dining room, living room. There's also, several years ago, a long time ago, my mother added a screen porch on the south side and west side of the house, and on the screen porch there's a bathroom, and then there are 4 queen-size beds along with a great big table and chairs. You can sit out there in the evening and then sleep out on the porch, and we sleep out on that porch, just fill up the house with people when we fill up the house with people. So I'm going to start this story on the first year that we did Granny's Camp 2.0. Now, when my children were little, we did Granny's Camp. Granny is my mother, and she would invite all her grandchildren up for 2 weeks in the summer to spend at the lake with her and with Bunsy and me, because we were teachers, so we were off in the summer. And usually one or more of my siblings would also come up, but a lot of children came up unaccompanied and spent 2 weeks with us up at Granny's Camp. And this created a bond between my children and their cousins that is almost as close as a sibling bond, and sometimes maybe even closer. They spent this time together and just really learned how to love each other. And we say that Granny's Camp is the place where cousins go to become friends. So after they grew up and started having their children, Rachel, my daughter Rachel, thought that we should do a Granny's Camp 2.0 and start with their children and start bringing their children together for Granny's Camp. Now, of course, 2 weeks was crazy to even do it way back then, so we didn't do it for 2 weeks. We did like 5-6 days, something like that. We scheduled it for a week, but really it was about 5-6 days. And folks came up. There were a lot more adults who came up with their children. Somehow in the 80s, as opposed to the 20 teens, parents are a little less likely to just send their 3-year-old for a couple of weeks away. So a lot of parents were along. And camp was It was crazy fun and crazy exhausting. But we got there the night before everybody else was going to come, and we set up the pop-up. Bunce and I were going to sleep out in the pop-up off the what side? The east side of the house, down the kitchen stairs. And we used to set it up down by the lake, but my sister or brother, somebody had put up an RV there, one of those giant RVs. So we just decided it was probably better to set up closer to the house anyway, because you got to go in the house for bathroom and everything else. So we set up the pop-up, and then we decided that we would sleep out on the porch. Now, remember, my mom wasn't here this year, so it was just the Davises. I think Leela May was an infant, and maybe one. And so it was the Davis clan. I think just Rachel. I'm not sure if Dominic was there this year. Doesn't matter. But Rachel and I were sleeping on the porch with the kids. And I think Bunsey decided to sleep in the camper because it's his Bunce Mahal. He likes to sleep in the camper anyway. And we were in the beds, and on the porch, if you keep a nightlight on, it's all screens. So there's a counter, probably 2.5 to not quite 3 feet, 2.5 feet from the ground, and on the long side, there's a counter, and then there's all these cupboards underneath it, and then above that are these enormous screens. So it's just wide open with just screen, with just posts in between to staple the screen to. But when you're on the porch, if there's a light on, and unless there's a moon or something, a bright moon out, beyond the screen is just pitch black. And the night birds, you can hear the whippoorwill, and you can hear the frogs in the lake and in the bog, and you can hear all kinds of night sounds, forest night sounds that are just soothing and wonderful. And the loons cry out as they're heading to nest down for the night. And but you can't see anything. You can just hear there. So we tucked in. It was just a little bit chilly, not too chilly, but you could tuck under the blankets in these comfy queen-size beds. And Rachel was in one bed, and then I was in the one next to her. And as soon as we turned off the light, we had a little night light on over by the bathroom, and there were night lights along the floor in case you had to get up, so you wouldn't clock your foot on something or fall to your death on stuff on the porch. But with just that little light, the blackness beyond the screen was really profound. And I was listening to the whippoorwill, and then the whippoorwill stopped. And I was just lying there and feeling really good about being up north. The smell is something that just, the pines and the sand and the lake, and it's just, it's the most reassuring thread through my entire life is being up north and being in this place. And I was just tucking all cozy in that bed, and I all of a sudden just got this really uncomfortable feeling, like being watched. And I assumed, it's just, because it's dark out there. But remember, I can sense these things, and I felt like there was something right there. And I felt like there was something that was really coming closer and getting closer and closer, and really with like a sight on me, moving toward me. And I was like, oh, hell no. I'm not doing this tonight. We had been working like crazy to set things up in camp. We had traveled. I was just too tired. I was not going to help anybody tonight. So I just said, stop, go away. I'm not talking to anybody tonight. Just go away. And I pushed out my energy. What I do I create this bubble of my own energy, and I visualize it and I feel it. It's like, you know, the place in your solar plexus where you get butterflies. So I use that spot and I just push energy out, and it's almost like blowing up a bubble, you know, a piece of bubble gum, only I blow it out from there, and I surround myself with this bubble to just put things a little bit away so you can't get in my personal space. And it's just my conscious creating a safe place for me to be and to rest. And so I did this. I put it out and I laid down and I felt pretty good. And then I remembered Rachel and Virgil next to me, and so I kind of expanded it so it was over their bed because I didn't want anything coming and waking them up. And I fell asleep, and I have no idea what time it was. Still middle of the night, and I just woke right up. Now, when my mother had been there, there's since the porch was added on, at the head of the bed there are windows that open into the living room. And my mother had a computer desk there, and she would sit at her computer until almost dawn every single night when we were up north. And so when I would wake up, I was always reassured. If I woke up at night, I was reassured by her computer light. When I woke up, of course, there was no computer light, and I was like, oh, and I couldn't feel her there. She wasn't there, and I felt like I needed to stay awake and keep guard. So I just lay there, and I just breathed, and I just kept pushing things away. I wasn't making a sound. I wasn't moving around. I was just lying very still, and after quite a while, I heard Rachel say, as if she'd been awake for a very long time, "Amma, are you awake?" And I went, "Yep." And her response was, "Me too." "Oh, good." And I said, "Don't worry. I've got it. You know, I've got this. It's okay." And as we were lying there, it felt like, I think, Rachel, I think you're watching, but I think it was this time that it felt like something was starting to manifest between the beds, near the foot of the bed, something like rising up out of the floor of the porch was starting to come up, and it was just like this slow, like this starting to, and I'm like, oh hell no, you know, I pushed it back down, and I just stayed awake and alert until the sky turned pink and the morning birds started singing their morning symphony. And then I went to sleep, and I slept for just a couple hours before everybody else was going to arrive. So we had to change the bed sheets and all that kind of stuff because I was moving out to the camper. We were moving out to the camper. So that was the first night there. And then I decided that there was just this, it was energetic. There was something, and it was almost like a frantic energy. It wasn't anything, you know, threatening or ominous, but it was a frantic thing, like a frantic energy. And it was not a good thing to have during camp. You could see it in the frantic energy could very well have come from the stress of being young mommies and daddies with your kids in a group setting like that. But I believe, and what I think, is that there was also something else that was sort of creating that sort of on edge feeling. So every night before I went to sleep out in the pop-up, I had brought some of my ritual supplies, and I said my prayer. I called on angels and ancestors, and I set up a protection around the periphery of the living space there. And I was thinking it was something that was coming from someplace else that was trying to get our attention. There's one of these days I'll tell you stories from a place called the Lodge up there, and I kept thinking it was something from the Lodge that was trying to get our attention. And so I just put this protection around the periphery. Now, this is just something, a protection is nothing more than a really mindful intention. And it's like, this time of year you hear the birds tweeting all the time. Well, what they're doing is they're singing to set up the periphery of their nesting sites. Because if too many birds of the same species nest too close together, then they use up the food supply. So birds will sing and establish their distance between their nests so that there's enough food for everybody. Smart, huh? Well, for me, when I set up a protection, it's like doing that bird song to create a periphery. That's how I view it, kind of. And put this protection around all the living people at the place up there. And every day we worked like dogs, doing activities and cooking like 30 meals a day or 30 meals a meal, feeding so many people, and just doing all this stuff and being so exhausted by night. In the evening, when the children would lay down, we would sit out on the screen porch at the big table, and we'd make our plan for the next day, and we'd write up a schedule and a menu, and the kids would get up in the morning and look at the schedule. It was really fun, and it would give us time to sit out and be together as adults without always constantly tending the littles. But as we sat out there, we had the light on, and we would have maybe a glass of wine or something while we were making the next day's schedule, and laughing a little bit, talking about things that had happened in the day that the kids did that was really funny. But I always felt that there was something outside the porch, something like just off the corner of the porch, that like toward the lake. And I kept feeling like if I actually went and looked out at the lake, that I would see something. And not an animal. It was not an animal. An animal feels very different to me. Each night when we would finish this and we'd go back out to the camper, I used to go and like to stand out underneath the stars and just look up, because the stars there are unbelievable. But this year, I just wanted to make a beeline from the back door right into the camper, into the pop-up, and not spend nighttime outside. I just felt that I was going to be seeing something that I didn't really want to see. And as I said, I thought it was coming from a different place. So camp went on like that. By the end of camp, I had gotten myself sick because I wasn't sleeping very well, and I just had to, one whole day, I caught a fever, and I just had to just stay in the camper and like sleep for an entire day. And then the next day was the day that we were all going to be packing up. So everybody, pack up day at camp is both hilarious, cacophonous, and utterly insane. Because you have all these children who have part of the camp packet is you get an inventory of what you need to bring. Everybody always brings extra stuff. So here are all these children with their inventory sheets running around, making sure they have their 4 pairs of underpants, making sure they have their sandals. Somebody has to run down to the beach to find the shoes that they left down there. People are running all over the place, looking in the laundry for their things. Parents are trying to help pack stuff up. And there is just this bustle and this crazy and stuff going on everywhere. So Layla was there that year, and she was a young adolescent, maybe 13 or something, and she was sitting out on the screen porch where Leela Mae was in her little seat, and she was keeping an eye on Leela Mae and little Maggie, who was, I believe, 3 at the time. And then the other kids were looking for all their stuff, finding we had a box for shoes out on the porch off the kitchen, which was the entryway. And I was out on the screen porch helping put together stuff for the kids had, those cupboards under that counter is where all the kids had their stuff. So all the doors are open and their stuff is all over the place. So I'm helping them kind of fold and get their stuff together, and whose is this kind of thing, going once, going twice kind of thing, when all of a sudden there is just these blood-curdling screams, terrified screaming and freaking out coming from the porch that goes outside off the kitchen. Now, when you come in the back door, it's actually the only door, through that there's like a little entryway, like a mudroom that has a refrigerator and a freezer on one side. And then all these wooden cupboards with these, those kind of brackets that with a hook on them that just go down, and so you lift up the hook and then open up these cupboards with all these shelves, and that's where all the brooms are stored and the beach towels, and the entire wall of this mudroom is these cupboards. And I thought somebody was hurt. Now, one of the things that as you walk in, right in front of you is the basement door, and the basement door had a hook and eye way up high where the kids couldn't reach it. But for some reason during camp, that hook, we kept making sure that was closed because the stairs were extremely steep. This place was built in the 40s, and nobody was thinking about code, so they were short steps and deep steps straight down to a concrete floor in the basement, and the bottom step was actually gone. It had broken, and so they were like 2x4s that were laid across the bottom hole to step off the second to bottom step and then onto that and try to make your way safely into the basement. And we were all terrified that a child would go tumbling down those stairs. So when I heard the screams coming from the kitchen area and the entryway porch, my first thought was, oh my God, somebody fell. And I went flying in there. And here's little Ava. Can't remember how old she was, but she was 5 maybe. And she was there with her Maji, with her grandma. Her mom wasn't there that year, but she has 2 big brothers. And they had their arms around her, and she was freaking out. And they were bringing her to me. And they said, Aunt T.I., something scared Ava. And so I got very calm, and I said, come here and talk to me. And Ava was the kind of little girl at that time that I think I heard the sound of her voice maybe 3 times, very quiet, little child, she just very easy to get along with, but didn't have a lot to say, and she was freaking out. And I said, what happened? And her big brother started to explain it. And I said, wait. Ava, tell me what happened. And she told me that she was on the back porch getting her shoes. No one else was on the porch when all of a sudden, all of the cupboards started rattling really violently. And she just started screaming, and her brothers came running, and then I came running. And I said, what do you think did that? Because I was wondering if there was something else going on that could have made that happen. And she said, I think it was a monster. And I said, okay, well, you don't have to be afraid. You're safe. We'll take care of that. It was probably, you have nothing to worry about. Just keep getting your stuff. And I told her big brothers to make sure that they were with her to keep packing her stuff up. And as I was talking to her, all of a sudden, from the other side of the house, from the other porch, I hear blood-curdling scream coming from there, and I hear Layla frantically calling, Amma, Rachel, Amma, Rachel. And I ran out there, and Maggie is distraught. Ezra was outside helping take down the camper, so he didn't hear that. And Maggie was a wreck, and she's screaming, there's a monster in the cupboards, there's a monster in the cupboards. So now I've had it. I'm like, okay, that's enough. So I said, I'll take care of this. And I did my come to Jesus talk that I do with ghosts. And I said, knock it off immediately. Stop scaring these children. Get out of here. We're trying to pack up to go. We are not going forever. Just knock it off. And there was this it stopped. So then I'm like, okay, we just got to keep packing and get ready to get out of here. Now, we were staying, Rachel and I were staying that night. I was going to travel with her. Bunce was going to ride with Ezra, and it was going to just be Rachel and me and Layla and the kids. And I'd had it. I was like, all right, that's it. Knock it off immediately. So things stopped, and we continued to pack, and people started to load their cars, etc. And then Rachel came to me with a very worried look on her face, and she said, Amma, the basement light is on. And I said, well, turn it off. There's a switch right at the top of the stairs. And she said, no, it's not that light. It's the one down in the basement. Now, this is a light that you have to pull a string, and it's way back in the corner. My mom, she used to have shelves along a wall that was the pantry. And so they put in and also in that basement used to be, the guy who built the house sold minnows and bait out of there. And in the winter, he had his tanks to keep the minnows in the basement. So there were all these huge tanks on one side. And then way back in the back part of the basement, there's one of those old fluorescent lights hanging from the ceiling, and you got to pull the cord to turn it on and off. And I was like, oh, crap. Okay, I'll take care of it. And I went out and got my stuff. I always travel with a little portable kit of ritual supplies. And I had my protection oil and a few other things that I will keep to myself. And I went out and I prepared myself for whatever I was going to deal with down in that basement. And I took the protection oil and I made the X's on my hands. And I closed my hands and I rubbed them. And I breathed in that oil. And what it does is it gives me the knowledge that I will be the stronger entity with whatever I face. This is what it does. It assures me, and I called on my angels and ancestors and did my ritual, the prayer that I do. And I said, okay. I went back in the house and I said, Rachel, I'm ready. I want you to stay up here, make sure this door doesn't close. And I looked down those stairs, and those of you who know me, stairs are not my friend. And they were so steep, and I'm looking at that bottom, and I'm like, holy crap, okay. The scariest thing about what I was about to do was making my way down those stairs, to be honest with you. So I told Rachel, stay here, keep the door open, don't let the light go off, leave this light on, and I will go turn off the other light. And she said, are you sure you can get down there? You sure you want to go down there? And I said, I'll be fine. Don't worry about it. Yeah, I'll be fine. She said, well, what if you fall? And I said, if I fall, call 911. But meanwhile, just keep this door open and I will be back soon. So I made my way down the stairs slowly, still feeling, still smelling that pungent protection that I had. And as I descended the stairs, I could feel it full. And the franticness, it was like the energy that I pushed out of the back porch and the screen porch had all gone downstairs. And it was still there. And it was not frantic. It was like frantic distraught, like, no, don't go is the feeling that I got. And so I said, we're leaving, we have to leave, but we'll be back. And when I come back, I'll help you any way I can. But right now we have to leave. It's okay. We'll be back. And I said, I'm turning off this light. Please don't turn it on again. And I reached up with my right arm, because at that time I could reach up with my right arm. And I turned off the light. And I turned my back to that energy. And I went up the stairs and I closed the door and latched it. And that night, I think we decided not to stay. Rachel, I'm not sure if that's accurate, but I think we left and went part way and ended up going and staying by the bridge or something. I don't think we stayed that night. Either that or my memory is off, and it was that night that something started to rise from the floor. But I think we left shortly after turning off the basement light. And that was the first year of Granny's camp. So I was telling that story and talking about that to Era and Ezra, and they told me of something that had happened to them. They had they had gone on a camping trip out to the Black Hills. And when they went, they as they drove out, they went the southern route through Chicago and up that way. And then coming back, they were coming north across too. And their plan was to leave the Dakotas, go all the way across, all the way to Granny's place, and stay at Granny's for a night, and then do the rest of the trip instead of stopping and setting up a tent again. And that they stopped there. So they called Granny. Granny was in Chicago. She wasn't up north. No one was there. It was the end of August, so everyone was back home. School had started for most folks. And as they were driving there, they were talking about the spooky stuff from the lodge and other spooky things that had happened up north, and kind of getting themselves a little worked up. And it was getting dark, and they were about an hour west of Granny's, and decided, oh hell no, we're not going there in the dark. So they got a hotel room an hour away, and then the next morning they got up and they went and they arrived about 11 o'clock. Now, traveling with them was Era's big dog, Solace. Solace was a huge black lab, this playful, wonderful, friendly, protective, big, good boy. And he'd been with them on this whole trip. And Solace is the kind of dog that he has a bark that will, you would just jump with that bark. She was living in the city with him. I was not worried about her at all. He was very protective, very good boy. So they get there, and they'd been, in the car, and he jumps out of the car, and of course there's a lake, and he's a lab. So he goes running down to the lake and jumps in and is leaping all over the place, running all over the place. And before he went and got in the lake though, he got out of the car and he stayed right by Erin Ezra. I knew I would get this part wrong. And she had the code to get in the house and the key, and so she went to go in the house, and he pushed past her because he would never let her go in a place first. He always went in first and checked it out. She said he was like the lead of the pack with that, but I'm thinking he was just making sure everything was safe for her to go in. So he pushed past her and he ran in the house, nose down, just sniffing all over the kitchen, all over the dining room, all over the living room. And there's an archway in the dining room that goes into a hallway, and then straight ahead is my mother's bedroom, and then down the hall are stairs going up with a door that closes, and a bathroom, and then another bedroom. And he starts going like full speed ahead toward the archway, and came to a screeching halt, and he sat down, and he looked, and he wouldn't move, and he just sat there watching and would not go any further. And then he jumped up and he ran outside. And this is when he got in the lake and was playing, and Ezra did some fishing, and they kind of hung out there, and they set up. Solace would not go back in the house. He ran around the outside of the house as Era was inside. Once he went outside, he was running along the side. She opened, there's these sliding glass doors in the kitchen with a screen, and he's running past and barking at her, like up and down, really anxious, like, get out of there, don't stay in there, is what she it was very unlike him. So instead of him just leaping around and being this playful dog, he was on the periphery as in protection mode. And she got stuff put away, did what she did in the kitchen. They went outside then, and then Era just wrote that he reared back and ran out of the house and kept barking at them through the windows. Right when he stopped at the archway, he reared back, ran out, and then started barking at the house all around the two sides, just where she was. And he did not want her to be inside, didn't want Ezra to be inside, and Ezra didn't want to be inside either. Ezra stayed outside. Well, that night they went and had dinner with cousins and a few beers, and they stopped, and at this time Ezra was still drinking, and he stopped and got whiskey, and she said he was drinking just straight whiskey, because it was going to be the only way he was going to sleep at all. So after they did that, they got back to the house, and they were sitting, I believe they were sitting out on the screen porch. The only way to get Sal in there was Era went in out to the porch, and then Era was like pushing him in, and Ezra went out on the porch and called to him, and then he ran straight through the house and out onto the screen porch. So Era and Ezra were sitting out at the table, and they had that, that Ghost Radar app. I don't know about that. I had one, and I would use it when I would sense something to see if it added anything, but I think I've got a better Ghost Radar than an app does. But anyway, they were doing the Ghost Radar app, and it was picking up like 3 different entities that were moving around them where they were sitting. This was kind of freaking them out. And then this app also says words, and the first word that it said was wet. And then the things faded, and then they came up again. And then the next word was lake. And then the third word was home. So it was wet, lake, home on this Ghost Radar. And they were freaking themselves out. So they turned off the Ghost Radar. And by this time, Era was like, okay, I'm going to bed. Now, the table on the porch is a long wooden table. And right next to it is my mom's bed. We call it the party bed, because when we'd all be sitting out on the screen porch when my mom was there, and we'd be talking and laughing at the table, she would climb in bed because she'd get cold, and she would participate from her bed there. So Era went not to the party bed, but she went to the one next to it, and she climbed in, and she got Sal was nervous, a nervous wreck the whole time, and the dog Sal, and she got his blanket or towel to put down on the floor because he wasn't getting up on the bed. And then she laid down, and she put her hand down for him to rest his head on, because he would always rest his head on her hand to fall asleep. And so she was petting him and letting him rest his chin on her hand, and then he settled down. And Ezra was still sitting up at the table pounding whiskey by himself. And Era fell asleep. And when she woke up, she woke up all of a sudden, and she woke up wide awake with a start. And the first thing she noticed was that the light was off over the table, and Ezra was asleep in the bed next to her. And the next thing she noticed was that Sal was not next to her, and she kind of leaned up a little bit and looked, and Sal was standing at the foot of her bed, looking down the porch, away from the lake toward the woods, and whining and going, and Sal was not the kind of dog that, if there was an animal out there, would behave this way. If there was an animal out there, Sal would have leapt and done his huge loud bark and gone right after it. So there was something there that he was seeing, and that was making him extremely, extremely anxious. And he's standing up, just his hackles are raised, and he's just looking that way. And he looks over at Era, and then she says, Sal, and he looks at her, and then he turns his head back and looks down the porch, and is just staring down something down the porch. So this is freaking Era out a little bit. So she sits up just a little and looks down the porch, and that end was completely dark. The light that was left on in the bathroom was all around the corner, so you couldn't really see anything. And she said as she was looking there, she said it looked as if something was starting to manifest down at that far end of the porch. And she's watching this, and Sal is just doing his kind of thing. And he'd been whining. I see she wrote to wake her up. That's what he was trying to do, wake her up. And she's looking, and this thing started to manifest. She said that it could have just been a shadow or that pareidolia, or what is it called, where you make figures out of shadow and things that aren't there. But Sal was looking at something, and she felt like she was looking at something, and she didn't want to see what might manifest. So she turned over and put her pillow over her head, or I think she put her pillow over when Ezra was still sitting at the table, and just tucked in. And Solace stood standing at the foot of her bed. After the longest time, he sat down, but he was sitting upright, and he did not take his eyes off that entire night of that end of the porch. She said she woke up just at early dawn. It must have been like 5 in the morning, and Solace is still sitting there at watch, just staring at the end of the porch. And when she sat up, he looked at her, and then he came over by the side of the bed, and she petted him, and he laid down on that blanket and fell dead asleep. He had been standing or sitting watch the entire night. I felt like I could relate when I heard this story. So after Era got up, Ezra woke up, and she asked him, I don't know if he woke up a little time later. I'm not sure of the chronology of this, but the gist of it is she walked down to the end of that porch to see if there was something maybe that could have looked like something down there. And as she walked down, she stepped in a round puddle of water. Now, it was not dog pee. It was water in a round puddle right where she thought she saw this thing begin to manifest. And she looked up and around. There was no skylight there. There was no source of water anywhere near there. And there had been no rain. There had been nothing. There was no way for a puddle of water to manifest on that porch linoleum unless it was brought there by whoever said to her in that ghost app, wet, lake, home. Well, I gotta tell you, they told me that the two of them, they packed their shit and they got out of there. They locked up, they cleaned up, they left as soon as they could, and they hightailed it back home. So now, having heard this story, we go back to Granny's camp the next year. And this time Pete, my brother Pete, came. And Pete is a wonderful storyteller. And Pete knows the history of the place and the history behind the place. And so Pete came, and that second year we decided that for bedtime stories that we would do instead of, well, when my kids were little, they would watch videos before going to bed, but everybody watches videos now, so that was nothing special. But telling a story was something really special. So each of the adults who were at camp there took a night where they told stories about when they were little children up north. It was just delightful. The kids loved it. And one night, Pete was telling stories about the history of the place. And he told a story that I had never heard before. He had heard this story from a guy named, let's see, what's his name? Oh man, he was the guy who ran the dump. And when Pete was like between 14 and 16 years old, before he had his driver's license, my mother would send him to the dump driving with trash, because you would go drop it off back then. It was not a transfer station, it was a dump. And this guy, here's his name. His name was Ed Tesmer. Ed Tesmer, that's it, Ed Tesmer. And Ed Tesmer was a World War I veteran. He had spent his entire life in that area, and he would tell Pete stories about World War I, and Pete says, and about the pioneers that settled that area, that came to that area, and made their lives there. And he told him a story about our property. Now, at the end of the driveway, there is a foundation for a house, and it's like hidden in the brush and the overgrowth there, but there is a definite foundation. When I was a kid and we were up north, my mother used to go find old foundations, and she would dig around them looking for antique bottles and things, and I remember her sending us down there to look there, and her back in there too. So I remembered that foundation, and Pete told this story. He said that a long time ago, around the turn of the century, the last century, a family homesteaded there, and they were people of color. And they built a house there, and they had some livestock. They cleared a field to plant a garden, and they tried to make a go of it up there. And as I say, they were not, the other settlers were pretty much German, Swedish, and they were not welcome there. And so Ed Tesmer told Pete that their house burned down one night, and they left. But then they came back the next year, and they rebuilt the house, and they tried to make a go of it again. And the next year, the house burned again, and nobody ever heard from them again. And all of a sudden, I had this feeling that where, like, your whole body, you get this full body rush, and I describe this as ghost for bingo. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, it's one of the people that was lynched on this property. That's who's frantic. That's who wet, lake, home. And I thought, holy crap. I thought, okay, I'm going to allow whoever this is to reveal their story to me. So after the stories, the kids all went to sleep. And then Pete told us the rest of the story, which is kind of disturbing. And I didn't know this part either. He said that he had been snorkeling in the lake, down in the corner of the lake where the old house foundation was. And he came across, this is kind of disturbing, he came across a big bone. And the bone looked like a hip joint and part of another bone. And he just brought it out, and it was, the lake is rather tannic, so it was preserved, but it was, clearly it had been in water for a long time, and he just took it out. He wasn't sure what it was, but Pete always collected things like that. As a little boy, his pockets were always full of whatever he found. And so he put this bone on the kitchen table. I'm hoping on some newspaper or something, but probably not. And this bone was sitting on the kitchen table when my cousin and her husband came over, and they had a place up there. Everybody, the whole family, my mother's extended family has places up there. It's great, big family reunions all the time. And he walked in, and he looked at the bone on the table and peeked in the kitchen. He says, "Oh, what's this?" Now, my cousin's husband is an emergency room doctor. And Pete said, "Oh, it's just a bone I found in the lake. I don't know what it is. It doesn't look like any deer bone I've seen or anything like that." And Trent says, "Huh." And he picks it up. He says, "This looks like it could be a human bone. Can I take it?" And Pete said, "Sure." So Michael, my cousin Michael, apparently sent it to a pathologist at the University of Michigan or University of Wisconsin. And what came back was that it was a hip and partial pelvis of a female human, pubescent, between about age 12 and 15. And the girl, it was her bone. Now, usually when you find a human bone like that, it turns into this great big investigation. So apparently Michael it was a friend that had done it and asked my folks if they wanted it to be investigated. But the thing is it was over 75 years old or something like that, and so it would not have been an active like murder investigation, because those, after a certain number of years, they don't, cold cases go away. And there was no missing person. Well, there was, but it didn't fit the description. There was a woman who was missing from the town, but she was in her 30s, and this was a pubescent female, hip. And they said maybe it was, it could have been as long ago as one of the Native Americans fallen through the ice and ended up in the lake. And I'm like, yeah, right. We know exactly whose bone that is. So they didn't do any further investigation. I don't know what happened to that bone. But then Pete was snorkeling, and he did have this. And that night, he told us that he had found a torch in the water, and he had saved it. And we went in the dining room, stepping over the sleeping children to not wake them up. Went into the kitchen. In the dining room, he reached up to the top of the hutch, and he pulled down a plastic bag and set it on the dining room table. And when he opened that bag, there was this powerful, pungent odor of kerosene. And it was a wood torch that was wrapped in leather, and the leather was like soaked in kerosene. The whole thing reeked of kerosene. And when he opened that up, I just got this nauseous feeling. I just got this rush, and like there was so much power in that object. There was so much terror coming off of that object that I was like, holy crap. Oh my God. I couldn't touch it. I did not want to touch it. I felt just this horror coming off of that, and I was terrified. That night, each night when I got into bed after hearing that story, I knew that whoever left the puddle on the porch and whoever was manifesting between the beds didn't come from someplace else, that this was her home, and she was coming wet from the lake. And I said to her as I laid down, okay, I'll listen to your story. Now, when I listen to a ghost tell me their story, it isn't like they tell me their story. It is the weirdest thing, which is why for so many years I would just say to myself, oh, it's just my vivid imagination, until things get proven, and then it's like, oh, maybe it wasn't my vivid imagination. Because what happens is I get a memory that is not my own. Now, when you think about your own memories, like you don't start at the beginning of the incident and then work chronologically through the incident to remember something. You remember the whole thing like bam, right? Like think about the last time you were with actual other human beings. You could just remember that. Bam, right? Dinner with friends. You don't have to start by getting in your car and driving to where you got to go to be with your friends. You remember the whole thing. And this is what happens. I am given a memory that is not my own, that is a memory of the spirit who is connecting with me. And I got this memory. Now, I have to warn you, this is really disturbing. It upsets me. I have gotten past experiencing these memories, past feeling the pain, feeling the fear of, and feeling whatever the spirit feels, and I can just experience the memory without it triggering like a ghostly PTSD in me, because there was a time when ghosts would share memories with me, and as I did it, I would like feel what they were feeling, and I have managed to not do that anymore. I can when there's a need to do that, but I don't, because it's not healthy for me. It's like, how much trauma can one person just take on? You know what I'm saying? So I got this memory, and the memory as I was laying there out in the camper with my eyes closed, I saw lights coming toward us. I saw lights coming, and several lights, like multiple vehicles coming up a road. And this was not good. This was terrifying. Something terrible was coming towards us, towards me. And all of a sudden, I snapped out of it because I remembered an experience that I had had as a young adolescent. I was under 16, probably 15, maybe 14, almost 15. And we had come up north to open up the place before my mom was coming up with all the rest of the kids. So it was my brother Dave and myself and our friend Joe and Luann and a couple of other friends. And to open the place up, you have to, get the pump on and you have to clean it. And we had to clean out all the, any mouse droppings or anything. And so we were up there working. And in the evenings, and I wasn't feeling well. I was menstruating and I was feeling crampy and just feeling very uncomfortable. So after the work was done, everybody was sitting in the kitchen. This was before the screen porch had been built. So the living room had this bank of windows that faced the road. And I laid down on the couch, got in my pajamas, and I laid down on the couch. And I fell asleep. And while everyone else was out in the kitchen and they were drinking some beers, I did not drink at the time. I was a Baha'i at the time. Yeah, that's true about me. And so I didn't do any substances at all. And I woke up, but I didn't wake up. I had this horrible nightmare. And in the nightmare, there were headlights coming down the road toward the house. And I got up, and I stood up, and I could still see them coming. And they were coming slowly and threateningly, like slow enough with a purpose of creating terror. Like, you know how somebody that wants to scare you just comes in just too slow, too close? And I stood up and I started freaking out. I started screaming, and everybody else is in the kitchen and they came running in, and I was hyperventilating, and I said, they're coming, help, stop there. And it was like a night terror I could not get out of. It was an awake dream. It was a vision of these lights coming towards us. And I was so freaked out that I hyperventilated and I passed out. And so everyone was very freaked out, and I woke up and I thought that they thought that when I came to it would be over, but it wasn't. I was still in this. I was right there while whoever they were coming to kill us, and they were coming and coming and coming, and I couldn't get out of it, and I was just screaming, and I was grabbing them and saying, we gotta go, we gotta get away. And finally, I passed out like 2 or 3 times there in the living room. And Joe, who was this big guy, strong, he just picked me up. We got in the car. Now the nearest, you couldn't call an ambulance up there at that time. There was, there were no EMTs. So it was to get to this little hospital 27 miles away. And I was in the back. And as soon as we were past the driveway and past the place, I started calming down. I felt like we were moving. We were going to be safe. We got on we got off of the little lane and onto the highway, which wasn't really a highway. It was a 2-lane, paved road, the highway. And Joe is driving really fast. And there's somebody in front of us that is, because they're all freaking out, they have no idea what's wrong with me. I have completely lost my mind. And every time I open my eyes, I start freaking out and screaming again that we have to get away. They're going to kill us. And there was a car, a pickup truck in front of us going, like a normal speed. And Joe just flew around him and took off, just sped past him. Now, this person took this as a personal affront, and saw a car full of teenagers driving that fast, and so he gave chase. Now I have to tell you that having a car's headlights right behind us, chasing us, triggered this terror all over again. And I was clawing at the seat, and I was trying to even like jump out the door. I was so beside myself. I was so freaked out. And again, I would hyperventilate and then pass out. And Joe's just driving. This guy's behind us, and he's honking his horn. And Joe just keeps going, swings into the hospital. And this guy jumps out of his truck, and he's got something in his hand. I don't know what he had. He was going to beat somebody up that night. And Joe scooped me out of the car, and my brother yelled, "Back up! We're getting my sister to the hospital." And the guy's like, "Oh, geez, I'm sorry." And we went in, and the hospital lights, the bright hospital lights, all of a sudden, things started to feel real again. And by this time, I was like slowing my breathing. They gave me a sedative. Before they gave me a sedative, they thought I was on drugs and tripping. And my brother assured them I was not. All our friends assured them that I was not, which I, of course, was not. So they gave me a sedative. And we stayed there in the emergency room in these bright lights for the rest of the night. And they sent me home with a prescription for a tranquilizer, saying that I'd had a nervous breakdown, because I guess I was so stressed out about something. I don't know what. So when I was lying in the bed in the camper, I had not thought about that for 40 years, or more, 50, 40 years. And all of a sudden I remembered that. And I remembered that terror. And so I said, "Stop. Let's finish this tomorrow." I couldn't see the rest that night. Each night, she revealed a little bit more to me. Now she didn't appear scary. When I first saw her, she was terrifying. She was like every one of those internet scary ghost girls you could imagine. She was drenched. She was standing with her hands to her side in a wet, gown. And she had black curly hair just dripping, and she was looking down and looking up over at me from looking down this terrifying thing. And then from that moment of making that realization that what I experienced was the first time that she was trying to connect to me, she no longer looked scary at all. She looked like a little girl, a young teenager. And when I said I can't do any more tonight, she just took a step back and faded. And I slept. And then the next night, I walked that day, and I prepared myself, and I said, I don't have to feel this, but this girl needs someone to know her story. So I laid back down that night. I called in my angels and I saw her story. And what happened was she was with her father, and I could sense that there's younger sibling or siblings behind. There's no mother in the house. I don't know what happened with the mother, but she was taking care of everybody. She was doing all the cooking, so even though she was young, she was in charge of everything. And her father called her to the door, and they watched the lights come toward them. And then they saw the lights were had multiple people in them, and saw them light torches. And her father told her to run. And she ran. Now the house was right by the lakeshore, and so she ran along the lakeshore, and then I could hear footsteps, thump, 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 and knock her down. And they grabbed her, and there were torches, and she could smell the alcohol, and she could see their faces, their red, hideous faces, and I could see their red, hideous faces as they pushed her to the ground. And they violated her over and over again as she tried to crawl to the lake, into the water. She was trying to drag her body into the water, away from them, and they kept pulling her back and grabbing her by her hair. And her hair was just in these tangled knots. And right as she reached the edge of the water, somebody pulled her head back and slit her throat. And she scurried into the water, the cold blackness of the water. And there was fire to the side. And she could hear shouts, and she could hear laughter as she slipped into the water, drowning on her own blood and the lake. And she just crawled into the lake and let herself go. And since that time, she's remained in the lake. It's safe there. It's cold, it's dark. But Pete started telling the story, and we became aware of a horrible thing that had happened in our happy place. And I felt such empathy for that girl. I thought, this is when they're doing the lynching project, the justice project, where they're trying to map lynchings all over the country and collect soil from those places. And I'm thinking that this should be a place that should have a jar in that museum. And so we spent a year looking for evidence. Oh, I have to tell you first. So after getting that whole story, the next day Rachel was talking to me, and she was very upset. And she said that she had had a terrible nightmare. And she described what this girl had shown me, except in Rachel's dream it was her that it was happening to. And all I could say was, I know, baby, it wasn't you, but I know. And we wanted to find out their name so that we could honor them somehow, put some kind of marker. We talked about doing like a funeral ritual or something to honor them, that family whose lives were ended so violently right there in our happy place. And I talked about this with my own children, and I asked Pete to see if he could find a name. We were dying to find a name of something. So, because if you remember someone's name, they continue on, And there's no record of the homestead. It was people would go and just set up a homestead, and then the county seat was way up north in Superior, really far away. So many people didn't even file until they've been there for years, and clearly this family was there for just a short time. So there's no record of a homestead there. There's no name that came through. And then before we left, I think it was that summer, as we, or maybe I don't know, it was, anyway, Rachel and I were walking the driveway, and she said, Alma, I know her name. And I said, you do? How do you know her name? And she said she had a dream. And in her dream, remember, she had dreamed where she was this girl. And she said in her dream she was this girl again. And she was floating right above my sister Colleen and I, who were walking down the road up north. And she was right above us as Colleen and I were trying to get the name. There are a lot of times that I can conjure the name. I can psych a name out. Not this. Nothing was coming. And so in Rachel's dream, she's telling me this dream, she was floating above us, and Colleen was saying, it's like 11. I keep getting 11. There's something to do with 11. And I said, Evelyn? And Rachel said in her dream, she all of a sudden just shot up away and into space. And so I'm pretty sure that the girl in the lake is Evelyn. And I don't think she's there anymore. Last year when we went, this was the first year we were there since my mother passed away. And the place was so peaceful and so empty of sadness, and I thought I was going to feel really sad going up north knowing that my mother had passed away, and instead it was like she was all over there. I mean, she was, but I mean, it wasn't like she was haunting the place, but she was just there. And there was no sadness. There was no frantic feeling. There was no discord. There was peace. And so I'm going to end this story telling you what I feel. That Evelyn had her story told, and you just heard it too. And there's no reason for her to keep reliving it or stick around. She was there all those years just watching, waiting for someone to be able to hear her, hoping someone could see her, that she hadn't just disappeared into the lake, that her family hadn't just disappeared into the ash and the stone foundation, that she was real. And she lived. And we were finally able to hear her story without fear. And although this is a really disturbing, scary story, there are when you can listen to someone's story and give them peace by being able to tell it, I get choked up. It's a very powerful thing indeed. So with that, I'm going to end tonight's story. I wish you all peace, and don't let hate. Stand up against hate. Hate and ignorance will be the death of us all unless we rise up with love, right? Unless we rise up and listen to one another and love one another and see each other for who we really are. As I first looked into Evelyn, she was terrifying looking. But when I really saw her, she was just a watcher, waiting, hoping that her story could be told. Well, good night, my friends. I love telling these stories. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to chronicle these things, and I'll see you next week. I have no idea why I said 10 o'clock, because I have to take a nap in the afternoon on Sundays, but it is kind of a good time to do it, I suppose. I love you all. I'm seeing a lot of people I love out there. Be well, stay well, wash your hands, and social distance. Stay away from me. It's the plague. Good night, folks.